Welcome, everybody. It is lovely to see all of you here. This has obviously been arranged at fairly short notice, and I wasn't sure how many people would attend, and whether I'd just be having, a private interview of all of them. But I'm much pleased to see that all of you are here to join us, and thank you very much for coming. Let me just explain what we're doing this evening. I'm Lindsay, I'm the vicar here at St Mary's, if you don't meet me before. We're here tonight because we care about politics, and that's about our community and about our country, and that's one of the reasons why it's so particularly good to have you all here this evening. I think I probably do just need to say that when we care about things differently, sometimes our mouths can run away with us. I speak for myself. So we're here tonight to listen to what our candidates have to say, and we've not got a lot of time, and in order to get the maximum amount of questions in, please don't interrupt as we go along. I'm hoping that at the end, if they have time, if you have time, there may be a bit of time to spend in the bar or out here talking to them, and you can always ask them questions another time as well. So please do that. Our format this evening is that I've given them each a maximum of 2 minutes. You don't have to speak for 2 minutes, okay? So feel free to say less or less time. In 2 minutes, introduction each. Then I'm going to open the floor to questions. I haven't asked people to tell me what they want to ask before. We don't really want to have questions on the same subject. So if we've had a question from somebody on the subject that you'd like to ask a question on, then we'll only be able to have that one question on that topic, because we'd like to get through as great a range as we can. They have 2 minutes each to respond. I've sort of randomly worked out who's going to speak first for each question, whatever the question is, so that it's sort of different people speaking first and last and all the rest, and following on from each other. And Ian here at the front is going to be my timekeeper. So Ian, if you could wave at me and at them when they've maybe done a minute and a half, and then you've got a maximum of 30 seconds to go. Okay. So that's fine. So I thought tonight, though, that with the events of Manchester in this past week, which have just thrown everything up into the air for all of us, that we needed to start really by marking that. So could we have a minute's silence? And if you'd like to stand. Thank you. Would you like to sit down? I think Manchester reminds us of the importance of our democracy and what we want to cherish in our society. Is the sun in your eyes? Do we need to pull some... The top. Okay. Yeah, can we just pull the blinds across the top? And if you find it moving down, then we can shut the blinds. So I'm going to begin by asking each of our candidates to introduce themselves or their party for a maximum of 2 minutes each. We'll just start for this one and start at one end and go along. So.
Well, Lindsay, thank you very much indeed, and I think on behalf of all of us, thank you for organising this hustings and to all of you for coming along. My name is Hilary Benn. I have been a Member of Parliament for this constituency since 1999. I just want to say this about the events in Manchester. Our responsibility now is to comfort the grieving, to tend to the wounded, to support the police and the security services as they try and catch the other people involved, and to show by staying united that we will not be terrorised by those who would try and take away our way of life and indeed our democracy from us. I think we face a very big choice in this election about the kind of values that we are going to uphold as a society, and how we're going to give them expression in the 6th richest country in the world at the beginning of the 21st century, because that's what we are. And yet, I think every one of us in this hall knows that 40% of children in this constituency grow up in poverty. There are 1,700 families who still live under the bedroom tax. We know about the use of food banks. People in the poorest part of Leeds die on average 10 years earlier than people in the most well-off parts of Leeds. Now, are we content with that? We should not be. We should do something about it. That means ensuring that we invest properly in our NHS and our social care. Prioritise above all investment in the next generation, because every individual has the right to fulfil their talent and their ability that is within every single one of us. And that means enabling people from low-income backgrounds who might have been put off further education, bring back the educational maintenance allowances that made a big difference, restore student maintenance grants. And if we do that, not only is that right for the individuals having the chance to give full expression to their ability, but it's fundamental to the future of our economy. And that's going to matter in this election, thank you.
Our next candidate is Alex Kurtzy from the Christian People's Alliance isn't able to be with us this evening, but Kyle from the party is able to be with us, so we'll speak on behalf of the party.
I'd just like to echo much of what Hilary's just said. In terms of my role here tonight, I'm here to demonstrate on how not to do a political hustings. I'm a complete political novice. I'm here to represent Alex, who has gone away. He had arranged to go and celebrate his anniversary before the election was called, and sadly that falls today. In terms of the Christian People's Alliance and why I became involved in them, it was because as I studied the Christian faith, I found a clear concern for the socially vulnerable. And I also began to look into that faith and to see that it didn't just touch on issues of supporting the socially vulnerable, which in Christianity is connected to justice, but it was also about restraining forces that are malevolent, or within Christian terms we would term them as evil, which I know in our culture is a very strong word to use. It would be things like, for instance, drug addiction, gambling addiction, groups that use usury to imprison the poor into poverty through unfair loans, just as a few examples. But beyond that, it's also about respecting the institution of the family as an institution separate from the state that should be honoured and protected by a society as the fundamental building block upon what that social system should be. And finally, it's about our identity in the church and in God. And when I looked at all the other political parties, I did not find one that fully resonated with the Christian worldview until I found the Christian People's Alliance. And that's the reason why I'm involved in the CPA, say rather than one of the more mainstream, more successful parties. And I invite a Christian to do the same.
Thank you very much. I'm Gareth Davis. I'm the candidate for the Conservative Party here in Leeds Central. I'm very grateful for everybody being here on a Sunday night. I would like to echo the comments that have already been made about the tragic events in Manchester, and just pay tribute very quickly to all of those who seek to protect us every day. I'm standing at this election because I believe that it is so important that we think about Britain's place in the world. And I want to be a member of a party that will deliver Brexit. I want to be a member of a party that will secure an economic future for this country. We've made some progress economically, but we've got a long way to go. But underpinning everything, whether it's our NHS, whether it's our education system, is how well this country is doing in the world, how well this country is doing economically. And I believe the best way that we can focus on all of those things is by delivering a very strong economy. This Conservative government has delivered 2.9 million more jobs in the UK. We've still got a long way to go, and I want to see more jobs here in Leeds. As your MP, I will focus on infrastructure. I will lobby the national government to get a better transportation system in this city so that people can move around quicker and freer. I want to create jobs by attracting businesses, but to do that we need a strong economy in Britain, and we need a strong Prime Minister. And that's why I'm standing, because I believe Theresa May is going to be the strongest Prime Minister we have available at this point. Thank you.
Andy.
Thank you. I hope nobody mind if I read a little bit. I'm not quite as experienced in public speaking as somebody like Hillary, who's had many years, of course. My name is Andy Nash. I'm standing for the Liberal Democrats. I'd like to offer a brighter future for Leeds Central and for Britain. Imagine a country where people remain decent to each other, where we have good schools and hospitals, so that our children have a fair chance in life, and our elderly are treated with dignity, with a clean environment and an innovative economy that drives jobs. Let's take the NHS and social care as an example. Everybody's mentioned it, I think. Only will plug the £6 billion funding shortfall and, crucially, justify exactly how we will pay for it with a penny on income tax. It's controversial to suggest we'll actually tax people at an election time, but we will. It's only a penny, and for somebody on £15,000 a year, that's less than £1 a week. Only our plan is endorsed by the former head of the NHS, David Nicholson, and 26 leading health experts, including the ex-heads of the Royal College of Nursing, the Royal College of GPS, and the Royal College of Psychiatrists. And I'm picking on NHS and social care because it is possibly one of the most important issues in this election, and how we address that problem is massively important. The Institute for Fiscal Studies always analyses carefully the May manifestos. They're respected, they're independent. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. And the IFS assessment of how each party's manifesto will redistribute wealth is also important. The IFS has concluded that the Lib Dems will do a significantly better job of redistributing jobs than both Labour and the Conservatives. Surprisingly, they're actually quite close, the other two parties. I'd welcome a question on how we do that. Brexit has put Burberry's £50 million South Bank development on hold, but we will make the pro-jobs case for the single market membership. It's not over, but despite what many people might think, we can retain some of our links with the EU. We've got a well thought through, sensible plan, significantly fairer, but will reduce the deficit before the other two main parties you've already heard. Thank you.
And Bill.
Hello, I'm Bill Paul-Freeman. I'm the UKIP candidate for Leeds Central, and my concerns are there are three particular things that you can expect a UKIP candidate and me to take particular care over. First of all is the terms of leaving the EU and ensuring these are as little damaged by excess agreement with the EU as possible, as open, as closely orientated towards the rest of the world. Secondly, the platform of personal independence and the independence of the family, and that should be the sovereign body that decides many aspects of society, and it should not really be subject to state control. The third and the most important thing at the moment has been the correct legislative response to the rise of radical Islamic terrorism, and what would be the most effective way to disincentivize that. Those are the three things that I care most about, and if elected MP, that's where I would focus on.
Great, good evening. So my name is Ed Carlisle. I came to Leeds in the 1990s to study and fell in love with the city on day one. I've lived here in Beeston since 2002 and have done my best to really kind of invest myself in the local community, involved in a range of local charities, youth programmes, events and more. I wasn't really involved in politics. I wasn't actively involved until a couple of years ago. But I think I suppose my love for the community, my love for the city really kind of led me to take the step to get involved in politics. So in just over 2 years ago, I joined the Green Party and have since then stood in 2 local elections for City and Hunslet. The Green Party is a small party. We don't get as much media coverage. People are kind of less clear about kind of where we stand on a whole range of things. But I joined the party because although it's a small party, I do think it's got a really big and really inspiring vision for a different kind of society. I mean, some of the things that particularly, I suppose, caught my attention, and I'm sure we'll talk about it throughout the evening, is just a real commitment to like meaningful devolution of power out of London, out of Westminster, into our regions, our cities, our communities. Much better, less bureaucratised approaches to education, a fairer welfare system, fairer tax system to make sure that big business in particular pays its fair share, and a real commitment to a housing revolution and a renationalised, properly nationalised NHS and rail system. So here I am now standing in the general election. It's fantastic. I'm having a lot of fun with and kind of a really inspiring time getting out and speaking to a wide range of people. A lot of people I know say they're really fed up with the same old and, could things be different? And I guess I'd say yes, I do think with better local politics and with the Green Party, things could indeed be better.
Thank you all for that. Can I just, at this stage, could you just raise your hand if you've got a question that you would like to ask? Not just so I get an idea of how many questions we have on the floor. So, okay. Would you mind if we shortened the time to 1.5 minutes for replies? Would that all be okay? Okay. Then I think we'll get more questions on. Okay. So, hands up if you'd like to ask the first question. Gentlemen at the front. I should just say before you do that we do actually have a loop system in here. So if you have hearing aids and you have a T setting, you can turn on to that.
Yeah, I'm a Christian.
Could you just stand up, please?
Yeah, I'm a Christian and I find it very difficult as the years are going by to live my faith as I see fit. I keep getting more and more restriction about what I can and say and cannot say. And I'm just wondering what you as a party can do to help me live the faith I want to do in the same way that I feel other people are protected from living theirs.
So in the random order, number 1 for this question is Bill.
So my own point of view on this is that all restrictions, all laws regarding speech that restrict speech should be scrapped. I don't think that any government can legitimately say what can and cannot be said. If somebody wishes to disagree with somebody, they should be able to do so, but it should not be a matter for law if somebody holds an opinion, whether or not, irrespective of if that opinion is right or wrong. So I would be, shall we say, I would certainly be first in your defence in that, and I would want to see the law changed.
Thank you. Next one with that, Ed.
Great. So I am also a Christian, and it was my faith that kind of led me into community work and into politics. I think there have definitely been excesses within, I suppose, perhaps an overly zealous left-wing liberal body, and I would consider myself left-wing and liberal. I think the no platforming policy, which is kind of shutting down kind of elements of free speech, has been damaging. I think we absolutely, especially with extremist views, not that I, for a minute, presume your views are extremist, but especially with extremist views, we have all the more reason to need to get them out into the public sphere in order to tackle them and, I suppose, challenge them. I think, of course, we need to bear in mind as well I guess it's an ongoing legal wrangle about people perhaps feeling violated and attacked, and certainly there's obviously good legislation around kind of speech that is inciting hatred, whatever. But again, I suppose as a committed liberal, I would be very much around seeing kind of, I suppose, maximum free speech and I suppose wanting to tackle some of what I would see as illiberal liberalism.
And then Gareth.
The first thing I'd like to say is I think political correctness has gone mad around the world, frankly. And I sympathise, I'm a Christian too. I think any governing party has got a tough job. You're never going to please everybody. But I think you've got to be cognizant of the fact that political correctness can go too far. I also think that you can have a real difficulty in balancing people's right to say what they want to say, but also balance that with the fact that hate crimes are going up. And I do not in any way condone hate crimes. I think there's been an increase in violence over the last few years, fueled by a number of things, and that is totally and utterly wrong. So I think any governing party has a real difficulty in balancing giving people the right to free speech and hate crimes. And obviously there are some that take it too far. I would like to see more people have the freedom to be able to express what they believe as freely and as openly as possible, and that doesn't go for just Christians, it goes for everybody. And I think we all just need to understand each other a little better and accept each other a little more.
And then Kyle.
Okay, I suppose I would throw a question back into the audience. Virtually all of us here have family members who died either in World War I or World War II. What did they die for? I don't think that they died so that a political elite could decide for you what was right and wrong in terms of your speech. I believe very much in an American-style freedom of speech, and I believe that that is the way and the best way to safeguard everyone's right to express themselves. The problem that we have in our society is that we try to balance competing minorities, and it seems that the establishment have decided that everyone is equal, but some groups are more equal than others. The best way to guarantee everyone's freedom is to make the first right, the highest right, the right that limits all other rights, is the right to express yourself. I would put the caveat in that of saying that that is an individual right, it isn't a corporate right. So that as an individual, all of you here should have the right to say whatever the damn well you please, no matter who that offends. And an employer particularly should not be the person to limit your freedom of speech, which is the situation we've fallen into accidentally in our society. Employers have decided what right can speak. I would say that corporations, though, don't have a freedom of speech. They must have restrictions, so bodies of people have their speech restricted, not individuals.
I'm sorry that you feel that way, but let's have a sense of history. There are those in the past who used to justify slavery by reference to their faith. And there were those of great faith who fought passionately to bring slavery to an end. If we're going to have untrammelled free speech, you don't have to go back many years in this country to remember there were signs in the windows of properties to be let that said no blacks, no dogs, no Irish. Now, I don't think that is the society that I want to live in. And I think when it comes to, let's take the issue of sexuality, which has been greatly debated, I think we found a balance in our society, because it's not the establishment with respect, Kyle, it is our parliament that we elect as a parliament. And if you don't like the MPs, you have the remedy in your hands on the 8th of June. Our parliament has decided that people should be treated equally on the basis of their sexuality. And that's the kind of society in which I want to live, and I won't apologise for that. And therefore you can't say to someone if you're providing a service, well, I won't serve you because you're gay. But Parliament has also said to churches, we don't say to you, you must marry gay people. We haven't said that to mosques, we haven't said that to the Church of England or anyone else. Yeah. We have balanced the secular world where people are equal and the faith world where we respect the faith of all religions and say you can continue to adhere to your faith. And I think that's the right balance for our country.
Gareth.
And Andy, last but not least. It's the tie.
You need a better chair.
But there's a yellow thing here. Well, I'm a Liberal Democrat, so I believe you should be free to act as you choose, to talk as you choose, so long as you don't infringe rights of others. And there's clearly a balance to be struck there. And we don't know. I don't know exactly what kind of things that you would have liked to have said that we're talking about here. So it's very, very hard to judge. Clearly, we have laws that hinder extreme forms of words and things which do offend people in particularly nasty ways. But we should none of us, as I think Ed has pointed out, feel free from offence. I mean, if somebody wants to offend me, as they often do, then they should feel free to do that. And, we don't have a monopoly on liberalism. There are liberals along this table. But I would take issue slightly, and this isn't language I would ban. I'm strongly against banning things as well. But I think we should be careful about our use of words like elites. I think there's certain language which serves to divide, and that's one of them. In the last few months since Brexit, that's one which has become fairly well used and fairly overused. I think at the end of the day, we're all humanity. If you wish to practice your religion as you see fit, then you should be able to. But at the same time, obviously, none of us must be able to insult you the way you choose to live your life.
Thank you. Who would like to ask the second question?
Thank you. My name's Asger and I live in Beeston. My question is, the gap between North and South is getting bigger and bigger, high investment, lack of jobs. As a party, and when you become a Member of Parliament, how would you be narrowing those gaps?
So I'm going to ask Gareth to answer first on this one.
Well, thank you. You're right in my wheelhouse. This is my biggest priority for Leeds if I'm a Member of Parliament. I'm a Leeds boy, grew up down the road in Bramley and then near Hare Hills. For too long, there's been a divide between the South and the North. Not enough jobs, not enough good enough jobs, not enough good transport links, as I've mentioned. The Conservative Party have got a lot to do. Every party's got a lot to do, but we've committed already to 15 billion extra in our road network. 6 billion of that will be allocated to the Northern Road Network. I, as MP, will specifically focus on being a champion for Leeds and Leeds City Centre and surrounding areas, to bring more businesses here, to be a real champion for Leeds, to highlight the fact that we're actually the biggest financial centre outside of London, but yet we are so underrepresented when this is being discussed. One of the things Labour want to do is put a financial transaction tax on that will hurt businesses in Leeds, because we have a lot of financial services firms. That will really hurt financial services firms in Leeds and the pensioners that invest with them. So I want to focus on this, transport infrastructure, my top priorities for Leeds.
Andy.
Thank you. It's interesting that actually several of us, I think, have moved to the north from the south, so that provides an interesting perspective, and it's a shame that there are more northerners on the panel as well as more women. There's only one, and she's the chair. Sorry. Just saying, it's a shame that there aren't more northerners on this panel, and there aren't more women as well. It's really plain to see when you travel from south to north and vice versa that there is a clear difference. It is interesting that London and the South East does provide a vast amount of money that ends up getting spent up here, but that is no excuse for not balancing the economy further. It would be very interesting if government actually tried hard for a change to encourage businesses to move up here. It is rare that you see them make a serious attempt. There's been a serious attempt with public services, and that has been to some extent successful, but of course the problem with that is that when we saw government cutbacks, it affected lots of places in the north quite badly, because they were heavily reliant on public services. So I think we need a very, very pro-business policy to encourage businesses to move further north. And I think they should do. There's a wealth of talent up here. I meet people all the time who are supremely talented, and they're getting paid far less for far more junior jobs up here than they would be in the south. So yeah, I echo some of the comments made earlier, and I think there's a serious amount of work needed. And the Northern Powerhouse, let's not have it an excuse for cuts.
Hilary.
We've got a really diverse economy in Leeds. It's one of our great strengths as a city. Education, the media, law, manufacturing, service sector. And there's plenty of places in the world, in Britain, the rest of the world, where companies can invest, to answer your question, Asghar. And what is going to bring people to Leeds? It's to make the most of what we've got to offer. Above all, our creativity, our skill, our imagination. But to do that, and I agree with what Gareth said, we need to be able to take more decisions for ourselves. Now, we've been campaigning in Leeds for a long time for a modern transit system. I think the priority for Leeds City Centre is not more roads, it is a modern rapid transit system. But because we haven't had power devolved to us to take that decision for ourselves, we've been dependent on central government, either allocating the funding or not. We've been dependent on transport inspectors deciding whether a scheme should go ahead. So we need the power devolved to raise the money. We need decisions over our own skills. We've got to ensure we've got the power to build the houses we need to house the workers from our growing population and others who will come into the city. And I make a specific plea. Crossrail has just been completed in London. Great for London. The government should invest in a Crossrail for the north before it invests in a Crossrail too in the south.
I think Hillary's just stole all my best lines. He's absolutely right that the investment levels in London are completely disproportionate to the investment levels across the country. And how on earth can we possibly expect companies to want to move up north if the London-centric elites aren't willing to invest outside of London? As someone who is part of the brain drain, I'm actually moving to London next month because job opportunities are better down south than up north, and sadly I have to make my own sort of way in life, so I've got to abandon the north if I want to have real success. So, you know, what really needs to happen is the government, and I am a northerner by the way, what really needs to happen is that the government has to break out of the London bubble, because London really is an entity unto itself. And it is not the rest of England. If you ever lived in London, it's quite different. I think the two ways to do that are, one, redistribute government departments across the country so not everything is concentrated in London, because that's why all the businesses want to be in London, it's because that's where the government is, and they want to be close to the government. The other thing to do is, as Hillary's already stole my best line, devolve the power to local authorities so that they can raise their own income in a really substantial way, or lower their own taxes in a really substantial way, so that region by region, city by city, each group area can pursue its own economic policies.
Bill.
Right, so this is a subject where I don't really agree with what the other candidates have said. When people talk about the north-south divide, what they are referring to is that it's that the economic incentives are different in the south of England to the north of England, right? But what makes for a successful economy is not something that the government can plan. It isn't you can't move government departments to the north of England and expect that to have a beneficial effect on those areas. If anything, quite the opposite, because it will take people away from productive employment in commerce and have a culture based around large government offices. The single most important steps for ending the north-south divide would be a significant liberalisation of the planning permission system, particularly in northern cities, that frankly, if you wanted to open a factory, if you bought the land and opened a factory, and before the construction of the M621, very large areas around here were factories. It is almost impossible to do so today. You cannot simply construct a workshop, and yet, until 1947, anybody could do that. Right? Now, that directly hinders job creation. Second is the very high rates of welfare dependency. And if people are paid not to work, if they are paid, if you have the same minimum wage, you have the same housing benefit, the same dole in London as here, inevitably that means that people will not want to, they are less likely to want to work here. So, anyway.
And then finally, Ed.
Right. As I was saying before, one of the things that really caught my attention when I was looking at political parties' policies was the Green Party's commitment to real, I suppose, meaningful devolution, not just to regions but also to cities and communities. I suppose, you know, when I look at my life, I try empowerment. Empowerment's a bit of a funny word, but empowerment is pretty much what I'm all about, and I do think some government can take some really key steps towards empowering regions, cities and communities with far more capacity to act. I think HS2 is an interesting one, high-speed rail. There's some really interesting research which suggests that actually the £50 billion put on there would probably only exacerbate, would only kind of drive more wealth into the southeast. The money could be spent far more better about investing in rail and buses in particular across the north and other regions. Let's not forget the southwest and Wales. I think financial tax was mentioned as well. I think actually a fairer tax system and probably more corporation tax would actually again rebalance things, because it would put more money into government coffers and out of the big business coffers, which are largely kind of centred around the southeast. I think particularly local authorities and just local communities need to be given much greater powers to build more housing. And I think again, regional assemblies and cities and communities should be given maximum power to shape their communities and their lives.
Next question, please.
Good evening, everybody. At the beginning of the last month, my father was diagnosed with dementia so bad that he has to be permanently set into a home. He's worked over 50 years, he's worked beyond his retirement age, he worked as a farm worker. And now 83, he has to live in a home, not in his constituency, but he's now in a home of 70 like-minded people. I would like to know now, what is the fair contribution for a family towards that? We're hearing about this more and more. Should a family be making a fair contribution to someone being in a dementia home?
Kyle, could you answer that first?
Yeah. Firstly, my sincerest sympathies for your situation. My own grandfather of late passed away from Alzheimer's, so I've got first-hand experience of the devastating way that it affects life. The fact of the matter is that there is a balance to be struck, and there's good arguments on both sides between social care and health care. We're all paying our taxes towards health care, but social care is kind of an extension of the health care. Health care is about repairing and rebuilding health, and social care, I think, is properly something that sits within the family. And what I think needs to happen is that families need to be supported more, so that they can take care and look after and support the ill within their own family, so that, and I believe that this is true of all of us, we're not forced to give up those that we love to an institution to look after them. I think most people are probably of the mind that if they had the means and the ability, they would like to do it themselves within the family unit. And so part of that is about increasing the carers allowance, which I believe is something ridiculous, like £62. That needs to be increased dramatically. And the family structure itself needs to be supported much more to permit families to look after and to care for their own sick, rather than throwing it off to the state.
Bill, could you respond?
What the gentleman describes is something that recently also happened to my uncle, who died after a period of severe dementia, and could accurately describe the death of my grandmother a couple of years prior to that. I think that with this with this matter, well, we are partly suffering from a long-term consequence, actually, of antibiotic use here, is that so many of us now survive into old age, and we survive, and instead of dying from the illnesses that carry people off swiftly, we now die from illnesses such as Alzheimer's disease and dementia and similar. Ultimately, it is difficult, verging on impossible, for the state and the taxpayers to be able to tax people enough to fully support somebody at a dependent stage of their life. If people on average spend 2 years in that state, and in a very expensive state, it becomes financially almost impossible for the government to do that. It is to do with the simple amount that they have to tax from other people and the fact that other people need their money. One thing I would strongly believe is that the costs in caring for people in that state should be fully tax deductible. And I think that would be, and also I think that it's, there we are.
Andy.
Thank you. It is a growing problem. I mean, I've been a councillor since last year. One of the bigger debates I remember was about closing a dementia care home that people relied upon. Okay, they were going to be reprovided somewhere else, but it was people were particularly attached to that one location for all sorts of reasons. And it was interesting how many councillors had a relative that they looked after, and I was one of the few who hadn't. And it's probably age-related, I suspect. Now, I think we need to start with the amount of money we spend on the NHS and social care. It's not enough at the moment, basically, is it? For anything. But really, the controversial points around this particular issue are: do we cap the amount of money a family has to spend, or an individual has to spend on themselves, effectively, or and if we do, where is that cap? That's where the debates come to, for good or evil. That's where the debate now is. It's not particularly fair. I think we have a social contract where some of us are fortunate enough to not suffer from any long-term illness. We don't need any long-term care. Some of us will need extensive long-term care, and it isn't fair for those who draw the short straw to have to bear a colossal financial penalty. Unfortunately, there is a cost. So I think that we really need to consider capping that. Our policy is to cap it. There is a report due out soon, which I think is talking about 72 grand or something like that. Higher numbers are being talked about, and I think that's really rather unfair.
Gary.
Well, thank you very much. It is no surprise that a lot of us have stories to tell about dementia. It affects 1 in 3 people in this country. My own grandfather has it. My grandmother cares for him. It's a very emotive subject for obvious reasons, and you'll hear a lot about politicians saying we just need more money, we just need more money. And we are going to be committing 8 billion more to the NHS, but it's about how you use that money and how efficiently you use that money. One of the things that we want to do is make sure that the NHS and the care system work better together. We also want to put a cap and a limit on how much families contribute to care and how much it costs families in this country when family members get into a situation where they have to go into a dementia home. But we're not going to jump in and just give you a figure, pluck it out the air without costing it. We're not going to pluck a figure out the air in terms of the cap. So what we'll do is, if you elect us, we'll launch a green paper. And we'll consult with people like you, people who actually vote for us, people who are affected by it, and then we'll come up to a sensible solution on that.
Ed.
Yep. Yeah, so thank you for the question, of course. Yes, I absolutely believe, of course, that we live in a society where it is right and proper that people pay a fair contribution. How could you not argue? How could you argue with that? But I also believe as well that the that the state, and that's not just about the kind of centralised Westminster, but I also think about local authorities and kind of local trusts, health trusts, need to be, I suppose, re-empowered to plug the increasingly kind of the growing gaps. So yeah, the Green Party are absolutely committed to, in the short term, plugging those gaps, enabling the NHS and the care system to get back on its feet, and really, I suppose, offer the provision that we expect from the state. However, the answer is not just throwing more money at this. The NHS times have changed since it was created in 1945. We do need kind of, I suppose, something of a revolution. Banging this kind of drum again, I'm really interested in the way that we should really try to decentralise the health and the social care system out of big institutions into maximum lots into community care, providing as maximum support for carers, as I think one or two of others have already said. And I also think, it's also about, I suppose, building stronger communities as well. And I think actually, if we can try to set a course for a different community, which is a different society, which is more community orientated, I do think actually we could end up with a far cheaper health system.
Hilary.
Well, first of all, I think we should celebrate the fact that we are living longer. And not mourn it, but I agree that it creates challenges in the way that we're set out. I certainly agree that we should increase the carers allowance. We're committed to do that, but not every family is in a position to care for their loved ones. People, both working, kids to raise. A lot of us have been in those circumstances. The first thing we have to do is to bring health and social care together, because they're all part of the same. There are elderly people in the LGI and GMs today who don't need to be in hospital for medical reasons. They've recovered from their pneumonia, their trip, their fall, whatever it was. But because there isn't the funding to support them in the community, they are occupying very, very expensive hospital beds. They're also, and one of the consequences is operations can't be done because you can't start to operate until you've got a bed to put somebody in. So local authorities have faced significant reductions in their budget. We have a rising elderly population in Leeds. We're, 330 odd care homes fewer than was the case, say, 5 years ago. And we need, in the end, to find a political consensus. And I won't necessarily say this on all issues, but I do say it on this, because the proposals that the government put forward recently, and then appear to have said they're on a cap, have caused a lot of concern, because people think they're not fair. But in the end, we have to find a balance between who's going to pay. The older generation have assets, the younger generation who don't. And are going to people contribute through a fair tax system? Because otherwise, you leave people who don't have money to get the worst service, and that's not right.
Could you just raise your hands? Quite nice to have some women asking questions as well, so I'm actually going to ask. Yeah, ask a question. Thank you.
Education. Over the last few years, the goalposts for education have moved backwards and forwards, and there's been quite a lot of disarray. Money is supposed to be going into education, and yet at a meeting I attended on Tuesday night, there were head teachers and head chairs of governors sitting around talking about restructuring. In other words, their budgets were so low that they were having to juggle staff around because they were going to have to get rid of staff because the budgets just wouldn't support the staff they had. And that's not a good thing, particularly in a career that is at the moment demoralised because of those cuts. Where are we going? What's the future? And are the goalposts going to be moved yet again?
Ed?
Yes, so I'm Chair of Governors at local primary school, Parkview Primary School, and the squeeze is very real. Our school and others that we talk to are kind of really getting the squeeze. So there's lots of rhetoric from Westminster about, there's more money than ever, but actually something's going wrong, and everything you've described is true. I've got many friends who are teachers, and they are utterly demoralised. There's a real issue around retaining good staff. People kind of feel utterly pressurised and leave. So there's something going really, really wrong. One of the kind of little straplines that I'm kind of trying to use for this election is the whole idea that the Green Party, I do believe, have fresh ideas, partly because we aren't particularly in the, we've only got one MP, we're kind of not particularly enculturated within the Westminster bubble. And I'm really interested in, I suppose, wanting to think fresh about things like SATs and exams, and wanting to think fresh about regulation. So the Green Party committed to scrapping SATs, and probably overhauling is probably the best word for Ofsted. Now, people might say, that's ridiculous, you can't get rid of exams, you can't get rid of regulation. Actually, there is an alternative. You look around the world, places like New Zealand and Holland in particular have got really interesting approaches to regulation, peer-based regulation. So instead of like a central organisation, Ofsted, going in and basically bossing everyone around and making everyone frightened and demoralised and leaving all that kind of stuff, actually kind of wanting to work with, enable schools to support one another to get a much fairer and decentralised education system.
Gary.
Agreed. My mum's a primary school teacher in Seacroft down the road. I hear this all the time. One thing that we're trying to do is, again, not just give loads more money, although we are going to give a lot more money, 4 billion over the next Parliament. And that's fully costed, it's not made up, it's fully costed. We've shown you how we're going to get it, unlike other parties. But one thing that we are going to do is make sure that schools that need it the most get it. So it's not enough to just say everybody gets more money. We want a fair funding formula so that schools in the greatest need, possibly schools like the one you're alluding to, possibly one like my mother's, get more money. Whereas a school in a really nice shire down south doesn't need quite as much money. So we'll make sure that the schools that need it the most get the most money. No school in the country will have its budget cut under our government, but we're going to make sure that that money that's available is more fairly distributed. It's not unlike what we talked about with infrastructure, the north-south divide. We want to make sure the schools that need it the most will get it. We'll also support teachers a bit more. We'll forgive the student loans that they amass trying to become teachers. We've also announced recently, and this was bandied around as a bad thing, we will, for those families that can actually afford to give their kids a free lunch, they don't need a free lunch. So we'd rather give the kids that need it the most 2 free meals a day rather than just 1.
Kyle.
Okay, so in terms of helping schools, it's really easy to identify which schools are struggling. We have offset reports, and there seems to be a clear correlation between the struggling schools and the poorest areas, and therefore there has to be extra investment in schools in the poorest health areas to help children who come from poor backgrounds who then end up achieving less in our society. And in a country that can always find money to bomb people and to bail out banks, it is quite easy for us to find money to support schools. And I think most of you would agree that that's a good place to invest your cash. In terms of education itself, we have to recognise that education has 2 roles. It's one about exposing children to facts, knowledge and world views, and this has to be done objectively and in a holistic fashion so that children can be exposed to many different kinds of views. To pick the most contentious, but I'm not here as someone who's a creationist, but I believe that intelligent design should be introduced within the curriculum, not necessarily in the science department, but within the curriculum so that children can be exposed to that point of view. Education also serves the purpose of forming the inner person, the inner man, and therefore I think all education has to be morally framed to help children to define a moral sense.
Yes.
Hilary.
I'm afraid it's not the case that the government is protecting school budgets. Because if it were the case, why are school governors sitting in the audience today describing the difficult decisions that they're going to face because of the changes to the funding formula? And we need to do something about that, and we are committed to protect school budgets properly and not in the way that the government's been implementing, because it is shifting money from areas like ours to other parts of the country. That's the first point. The second point is that This is the most challenging job of all and the most important job in our society, educating the next generation. And our children in a community where 40% grow up in poverty need a first-class education more than anybody else. And the point I make about free meals is this: hungry children can't learn. And instead of taking away the free primary meals there are for the first 3 years, which is what the government is proposing to do, and replace it with cold breakfast, we think there should be free primary meals for all children because it helps them to learn. And the last thing I would say, we haven't discussed it yet, is going back to the 11 plus, which Theresa May announced as one of her first policies, having said she wanted to bring the nation together. I am resolutely opposed to the 11 plus because it divides children, it undermines their confidence, it calls them failures, and we've had enough of the legacy of that. Let us enable children to bring their talent to the fore and not tell them they fail when they're 11 years of age. It's scandalous.
Phil.
So I'm somebody who spent a number of years working in Switzerland, which is an interesting country and has a completely different educational system. In this case, the schools themselves are directly controlled by the smallest unit of government, which is the parish. So literally, in Switzerland, this parish would have regular elections to the school board and would have a particular tax to pay for schools, and there would never ever be a possibility of national politicians sitting here and pontificating about how on a national level schools should be directed. It's absolutely absurd. No system like that can work from the top of the government right down to the school cleaner. You need direct involvement. You need the people who go to the school to actually have a control over that. And until you do that, of course you will find runaway expenses. People have talked about cuts in spite of spending increases. Well, of course, because the local authorities have maintained an enormous bureaucracy to control the schools, to manage government targets, and all these things that are entirely useless. This is very, very simply solved by having genuine local democracy and the independence of a particular neighbourhood to set their own policy on the matter.
Thank you. So,
may I answer as well? Sorry.
always
No, she lived down better. Do you think she's going to be
Yeah, I just very quickly disagree with something that Bill's just said. It is a balance. You can't have everything local, and in the same way you can't have everything national. I'd also agree wholeheartedly with much of what Hilary said. We have very similar policies in some of the areas he talked about in terms of free school meals, extending them to all primary school children, and so on. One area where we differ from Labour on education, and actually I'll refer to the cuts as well, he's absolutely spot on there. One of the key reasons that we're seeing real cuts is because we're not following inflation. So things like pupil premium, which we introduced in government, is effectively being cut by not growing in line with inflation as costs rise. But one area where we're different from Labour is Labour have chosen to spend a lot of money on getting rid of tuition fees, which I suspect is aimed at us. We believe that actually early years is where education spending should be prioritised. Okay, that is where the damage is done. If pupils aren't taught properly at that age, if they aren't given the right skills to read and write as they enter primary school, then what hope is there if they cannot enter university because they can't get qualifications? How can they benefit from free tuition fees then? So we would put a lot more money into early years. We would triple the early years pupil premium, which we also introduced, but we'd triple that. Thank you. And yeah, I mean, I think we've really got to start from the ground up and grow. We've got to prioritise where our money goes, and early years is definitely where it is most needed.
question at the back.
Yeah, hello. I wanted to address the current violence that we've experienced in this country and throughout Europe. Obviously, it's taken within Britain and Europe, it's taken a predominantly Islamist form, though not purely, as we saw from the likes of Anders Breivik, and as we see from the shootings that take place in the United States. It takes other forms as well. I think this hints that the real problem of it is not somewhere over there, like in the deserts of Arabia, but within Western societies itself. I'd argue that this kind of nihilistic lashing out reflects a certain self-loathing within Western society and a real downer on Western civilization. If you agree with that, how do you combat it? If you disagree with that, what do you think caused it?
Hilary.
Well, I don't feel a self-loathing for the society that we have built and created. There are things, as you've gathered this evening, I would like to see change. But I think a democracy where people are able to express their views, decide how and by whom they are governed, that allows people to freely express their religious views, one of the great things about our country that people love. I'm afraid there are some people who despise all of those things. And as we saw this week, 23 Coptic Christians were murdered on a bus by the people who hold these views. Now, I think in the end we have to stand up against them, as you may gather, physically, where they try and take over other people and oppress them. We have to take on the argument ideologically. And I know there are those who say Western foreign policy is to blame, but if that's the case, can you explain the attacks in Sweden, in the Philippines? Can you explain 9/11, which was before what happened in Iraq in 2003, or the Bali bombings of 2002? If you believe in certain values of our society, and I do, I think it's really important that we defend them in the face of those who think that the way to end their life is to put a bomb on their back and blow up children who are enjoying a concert. And I don't know why that young man did it, but the ideas that he represents are ones that we have to say, we don't accept those in our society, and we're going to stand up for what we believe in.
Yeah. Okay, I think it is definitely not the West's fault that an ideology known as Salafism, which has been sponsored and exported by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, has inspired people to commit acts of terrorism. Now, it's obvious that not all Muslims agree with the Salafist interpretation of Islam, but within Islam, I speak as a religious studies student from university, there's a clear narrative within the Quran that speaks of jihad and domination. And there's 109 verses in the Quran that talk about jihad, and they explicitly talk about jihad against the kuffar, which is the unbeliever, and it speaks about subjugating the alim al-kitab, which is the Christian and the Jew, until they accept Islam. That's in the Quran. Now, not all Muslims tap into those narratives, but the Salafists do. And the Salafists are the ones that are exporting this hideous ideology. And I think that we need to accept that that is an ideology that predates colonialism, it predates the foundation of Israel, it predates any of the interventions in the West. Christians were persecuted before the attack in Egypt just this week, and the political establishment have done nothing about it for decade after decade after decade. And it's their apathy that we are now suffering from.
Ed.
Yeah, I mean, how to tackle it? Of course, we are very fortunate. We live in a society where we have, very effective kind of police and intelligence services. We're fortunate, but I do think we just need to be careful that the solution to me isn't ever more policing and ever less ever fewer civil liberties. I think we need to once we get over the immediate response, which and when I say immediate, I'm talking about several years to go. I think we just need to make sure that we don't become, I suppose, an illiberal society with armed police on every street corner. I think we need to, I think with regards to the police, I think we need to scrap the prevent agenda, anti-extremist agenda, which I don't think is working. I also think we need to, on a very practical level, we need to decentralise the police out of their mega stations, which seem efficient, but they're not. I think we need more I think we need police more active and more embedded within our communities. I also think that policing is quite a costly substitute for well-funded community and youth services, which I think would build a better, I suppose, a stronger community. I know somebody who I think flirted with extremism, and partly he was doing it because he wasn't getting the mental health provision he was. He then latterly got some provision. He got some love and support from some people around him, and I think he's kind of journeyed away from that now. But I think it's kind of it's that kind of thing as well. Finally, I don't think military interventions, Western military interventions, caused extremist Islam. But did we pour fuel on the flames? Yes, I'm sure we did.
And
Thank you. I think we live in an era where we all look for simple solutions and binary choices in order to help us solve problems. And this is obviously a colossal and complex problem. It's not just here or just there. It's a combination of both. It's not okay to say, well, we'll never intervene abroad, because sometimes it is necessary to save lives. I think it's a great shame we didn't intervene in, was it 2012 or 2013, when we had the opportunity in Syria. And I think that's for a matter of great regret. I think in terms of, again, scrapping prevent is not the answer. Perhaps improving it or replacing it with something better along the same lines. Yeah, perhaps that's what you meant. But some people like Andy Burnham have talked about that as well. It's not such a binary choice. You've got to have something there. Parts of prevent are working. I think that's... We're not going to solve this problem overnight. It's going to take a very long time. We mustn't look for, if you see an easy choice, if you see an easy answer, it's probably the wrong one. So let's just take our time. This was the one attack that got through. They were expecting something to eventually. Lots have been stopped. We're doing a great job. Let's just try and be very tolerant and understand everybody around us, and hopefully see more of that pass. Thank you.
Bill.
So I won't go into the reasons why somebody would choose to strap a bomb to himself and blow up a crowd of people. I think that's a secondary consideration. What I do think is I do think that what was being done at the moment to suppress this is demonstrably failing. If anything, I would say that the result of the current policies has been an exponential increase in violence. And now an exponent begins slowly, and it has begun slowly, but the rate of progress is growing. So I see things I don't see this as a particularly complex matter. I see it in terms of incentives. I see that if somebody I see that when somebody has determined to end their life in such a violent manner, that there must nevertheless be costs imposed on them. And I think the first thing I do advocate, and I think this should be seen in the light of 22 or 23 people now being killed, is I do strongly advocate a death penalty for terrorist acts, and also for the accomplices who may not have actually carried out the act. And secondly, I would advocate a form of civil penalties for, civil attainder, where financial compensation costs would be imposed on the estate of those who carry out attacks like this.
Gary.
Thank you. These people hate everything we stand for. They hate our values, they hate our freedom, they hate the fact that we're more united than most people think or realise. That said, I don't agree that we should have a death penalty for terrorists. They seem quite happy blowing themselves up, so why do them a favour and kill them? Spend all that money doing it. I'd like to see them locked up. Terrorists only have to get it right once. The intelligence services have to get it right every single time. And I'd like to see more politicians praise our intelligence services. They do an amazing job. And one thing that we'll do is much more, we'll focus on bolstering the intelligence services in the next Parliament. I heard yesterday there's something like 500 open cases on possible terrorists right now in the UK. That is absolutely terrifying, and so we need to bolster our intelligence services. But we also need to make people feel safe on the streets, and I'm afraid that does mean a change of policing, more firearms, more police with firearms. And as bad as that is, I think that is a precaution we now need to take. Today, Theresa May announced that we'll be also appointing a new commissioner for extreme terrorism. That person will work much more closely in communities, much more closely with local police to build up local community policing, but ultimately we'll have one person responsible for extreme terrorism in this country.
We have time for one final question, so I can't go to my husband, sorry.
I think my question is just following on pretty much on the last question that was asked, but more specifically, as a Christian, I am concerned with the persecution of Christians in other parts of the world. And my question is quite specific to yourself to say, what will you do, to help, Christians who are being, persecuted by state-sponsored, sort of persecutions?
Andy.
Sorry, could I ask quite specific to, I misheard?
Yes, as an example, our government supports, this is just one example, supports, the Pakistani government, financially, and in Pakistan we've got RC Bibi, who has been in prison, for the last 7 years, and is threatened by, death penalty, for just saying that Jesus Christ, died on the cross for his sins, and ask a question to say, what has Muhammad done for him? So it's, a specific question like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously not okay to put somebody in prison because they're a Christian. That's something I definitely agree with. I don't think we should just shut down diplomatic relations with Pakistan, obviously, as a result of one incident like that. We have to work with countries who have issues of any sort, that would be it corruption or human rights abuses. We have to sometimes work with them. There are limits, there are always limits where you say no that far and no further. But you have to work with them, and if you do work with them, you can use leverage. You can use the funds that perhaps you're providing to encourage them to improve their behaviour. But at the end of the day, they are a sovereign country, so we have to tread carefully. What we cannot do is allow this to be is to allow this to feed into any narratives, which I'm quite certain you weren't doing, but sometimes is done. This isn't a Christians versus Muslims situation. There are some Christians doing bad things. There are some Muslims doing bad things. There's probably somewhere some Buddhists doing bad things, and what we must avoid is any dialogue descending into this whole sort of clash of civilizations narrative. I know this is not what you're asking about, but I wanted to use this opportunity to get that across. And we must work together with people like that, try and improve the way that they look at other religions and work with them, but not use this as a means to divide people. Thank you.
Bill.
Having worked abroad for significant parts of my career, I've frequently noticed that in spite of what we think in this country, the British government is one of the most influential governments in the world. It wields a great deal of power, both soft and hard. It is, I think, very perfectly reasonable to expect the British government to at all times prioritise the defence of Christians and other persecuted minorities within countries that seek to do that. We have a great deal of leverage, particularly, for example, in Pakistan, a country that enjoys close commercial links with the UK and a high degree of economic integration. So, of course, from my point of view, I think that it's very important that that becomes a central aspect or a significant aspect of the diplomatic policy of the government.
I already think we've got a pretty strong voice in the world, but I think after Brexit we'll have an even stronger voice to be able to influence policy of countries that we engage with today. But I also think that we need to be a bit smarter about how we use our foreign aid budget. If we are giving foreign aid to countries that quite frankly are treating their citizens or Christians or whoever it is in a bad, wrong way, we should stand up to them a lot better and a lot stronger. And I think we'll be doing that if you give us your vote. Thank you.
Okay guys, I would beg you not to be fooled by the platitudes of the established parties. They will say all the right things and then they will do everything in the next parliament that they have done in the last few parliaments. They're not going to change anything because they don't really take the persecution of Christians seriously. They speak only in general terms about how persecution based upon religion is a bad thing. But if they wanted to do something about this, they could have done it a long time ago. The Christians of the Middle East, frankly, need their own country. A place where they can set out their own course in life, free from the persecution that they are currently suffering. Saudi Arabia needs to be brought to task. Both parties, political parties, could have done something with Saudi Arabia a long time ago, but they're not. They're just using them as a trading country. Saudi Arabia needs, in a way, to be treated like North Korea. We see North Korea as a threat because of its ideology and because of the things that it stands for. Well, Saudi Arabia needs to be treated in the same way. And in terms of the sort of clash of civilizations thesis, I would just encourage you to read the book and make up your own mind. I'm not saying that I subscribe to it, but what I am saying is just simply being told not to believe something is true. It doesn't make it a fact. Go out and buy the book, read it for yourself, and you decide whether there's any genuine merit in that argument, and hold these people to account for how they don't stand up for persecuted Christians.
500 years ago in this country, we used to burn people at the stake because they were the wrong kind of Christian. So we have been through this as a society, and we have progressed and advanced. I agree Pakistan is a sovereign country, but I think the way in which their blasphemy laws are used, sir, is wrong. And I agree with Bill, perhaps the only time tonight, that we need to make this absolutely central to our foreign and diplomatic policy, because we should use the voice. Gareth made the point, we have a voice in the world, we have influence. But I disagree with you, Carl, when you said the politicians have done nothing. I mean, when I stood up in the House of Commons on the 2nd of December 2015 to speak in favour of Britain participating in action against Daesh in Syria as well as Iraq, I did so because Daesh are committing genocide against the Yazidis and Christians, and I wasn't popular with everyone for having done so, but I made that speech and voted in the way that I did because I think it is important sometimes to stand up against the ideology which thinks it has the right to kill anyone who expresses a view, religious or otherwise, with which they disagree. Now, that is not the way we're going to solve the problem, because in the end we have to learn to live alongside one another, of all faiths and none. And our society is a really good example, I think, having been through all of the other ways of doing it, is actually an example to the world, and we should work our hardest to make sure that those kind of values are spread more widely and support people in other countries who are trying to do the same.
Ed.
Yeah, of course, Britain should be working far harder to bring to account groups or nations who are persecuting minorities. We have to be careful, though, that we aren't seen to perhaps favour some minorities over others. So, for example, in Burma, the Muslim minority in Burma are getting absolutely hammered by the, I suppose, nominally Buddhist majority. We need to kind of be, I suppose, in the perception of the world, we need to be careful that we're not kind of favouring, like, supporting Christians over others, because I just think that builds the clash of civilizations narrative. I do think... I think we do, once again, if I'm honest, we have to be self-critical and look at the way in which the West kind of, I think, didn't create radical Islam, but certainly poured fuel on the fire. I mean, George Bush, bless him, was using language like crusade, which is just not helpful. And I think kind of in the perceptions of many people in the Middle East, to use that example, include extremists, but also people who aren't like the radical extremists. I do think they kind of felt that was a kind of a civilizational attack on them, and the extremists are therefore, I think, on some level, taking it out on kind of victims in Manchester, but also taking it out on Coptic Christians in Egypt. So I do think we need to be reflective. Yes, we need to be far more robust in holding Saudi Arabia and others to account. We need to stop selling them so many weapons. We also, I think we need to redress the balance around, we spend a lot of money on warmongering, we spend far less on helping other countries develop.
Thank you, all of you, and all of you for your questions. I'm sorry if we didn't get a chance to ask all of them. I'm now going to ask each of the candidates just to give a final statement this evening. So, we'll start this end.
Oh, sorry, I thought it was going to be last.
We said 2 minutes, so...
Okay, right. Thank you for coming, of course, on this Sunday night and engaging and listening. I can't speak for the other candidates, but I'm not dashing off. I'd love to sit here, have a lock-in, just get really drunk and talk about it. And we'll all go home friends. It'll be great. I suppose I would just say, I do think with so many things in the air, I do think we are at perhaps more of a crossroads than normal as a community and as a society. I do think, when I'm out on the doorsteps talking to people, it feels like people are far more politically fluid than they have been in the past. People really kind of far less sure about how they're going to vote. I think that creates real opportunities. And I suppose I'd just say, if you really just take time to if we take time to step back, I do think we live in a daft society with a daft economy, and so much is unfair, so much is kind of unhealthy and in many ways toxic about our society. But there's also so much goodness in our society, of course. And I just think we need to get some fresh ideas, we need to get some fresh people into Westminster, and I do think we can really kind of start to rebuild a thriving, vibrant, fair society again. Please, speak to me tonight, but also speak to me in the coming weeks and months. Whatever happens on the 8th of May, 8th of June. 8th of May. Whatever happened that day, I can't remember. I'm not going anywhere. I love Leeds, I love South Leeds in particular, and let's work together, let's make things better.
Bill.
I suppose I would like to, I think the matter I'd like to bring up is really that of political prudence. I think that for a very long time in this country we have, the political class and people have wished for things politically that have actually been relatively imprudent. There have been, in particular, for instance, regarding, for example, asylum, where the policies of asylum have been very relaxed, and within the last week or so, the son of one of those asylum seekers blew himself up in Manchester. There are a lot of the role that a politician has is to avoid foreseeable problems. And while those solutions may not be popular, it is very important that a politician convinces people that it is necessary to take these steps. Particularly, I think, the necessity of understanding that you cannot have an unlimited amount of money spent on social welfare, that in fact that actually causes problems far more than it creates, that security is of extreme importance, and that you cannot simply wish that somebody is not violently inclined and then hope they do not blow themselves up. That is an imprudent course of action. And particularly also, although it hasn't particularly come up today, I think the question of foreign relations of the EU is particularly important. And while we should seek to have good relations with the EU, we should not be politically constrained. It's a democratic right that we be able to govern ourselves.
Andy.
Thank you. I'll just labour one point just once more. We mustn't fall into the traps the terrorists lay. They want us to turn on each other. That is their goal. If we sow division, then we will reap division. But this is your future. I think it doesn't matter what constituency, and you've got a chance to change the way we're going. We could go down rabbit holes, or we could end up making the world a better place. You need to think very carefully about some of the easy promises you're given. I will refer, I'm afraid, specifically to the EU referendum last year, where it was very simple: leave or remain. Everybody had to make a choice, and everybody made the right choice for them, and that's fine. But we now have to think of the consequence of the decision we did choose, which is to leave. We have now, for rightly or wrongly, and I would say wrongly, passed the buck to Theresa May. It is now up to her to work for a Brexit that is best for Britain. Well, that scares me, because at the moment there is no real scrutiny of what she is likely to come back with. It's likely to come back to Parliament, but we've already seen that Jeremy Corbyn will whip his MPs to vote with the Conservatives. So that's not real scrutiny. I don't care whether you voted Remain or voted Leave, it doesn't matter. We're all in it now, and we have to make sure that what that deal is a good one. And if it isn't, even if you voted Leave, you should consider the idea that we should reverse course. We're not lemmings. We really need to think about this now. It will change our country for decades to come, and it is the fight of our generation to determine how well it succeeds or doesn't. And if we get this wrong, our children will suffer and pay for it, financially and in many other ways. So I would ask you to support, whether you voted Remain or Leave. I hope you believe that we would make this country fairer in terms of ordinary policy, but I would also ask you to support a call for a second referendum. Let the people decide whether the deal is any good or not. Don't let the Conservatives do what they like, because that's happened in the past and you see where that's led. Thank you.
Thank you. There's been a lot of discussion tonight about our security, about our place in the world, and what this ultimately comes down to, whether you like us personally on this panel or not, is who you want to be Prime Minister on June the 9th. I'm backing Theresa May because she's got the experience and the respect overseas to negotiate us a decent deal in Brexit. Whether you like Brexit or not, she will deliver a better deal, I believe, than Jeremy Corbyn is ever able to deliver, because of the respect that she brings to the world stage. She's also been Home Secretary for a long time. We're in great danger at the moment of going back in time, of cutting back on our intelligence effort, cutting back on our place in the world and our influence on the world. Theresa May has the experience, the skills and the judgment to lead us through these difficult times, whether it's economically through Brexit negotiations or whether it's difficulty through security issues. I really do believe it. I really do believe that this comes down to who you want to be Prime Minister. And if you really want Jeremy Corbyn, then vote for Labour. But I plead with you, this is so important. We need to secure our place in the world, and I believe the Prime Minister to do that is Theresa May. At a local level, I'm a Leeds boy and I care about this city. I'm from here and I want to be for you. I want to bring jobs here. I want to bring the infrastructure we need. I'm supportive of businesses. I won't be encouraging the government to tax businesses. I want to encourage them to come here and employ our people. I want to see more apprenticeships of our younger people. We're going to be funding 3 million more apprenticeships. I want to support that and make sure that Leeds has a really, really strong voice in Parliament from somebody that was actually born here. Thank you.
I'd like to thank you all for attending the coronation of Hilary Benn as our next MP. This is a safe seat, we know Hilary Benn's going to win it. However, if you are interested in having the major political parties take upon into their agenda the Christian agenda, Christian concerns, the way that our political structures are so fashioned is that they work by absorbing the agendas of the observable consumer. So if you want the Labour Party and the Conservatives, who are our rulers and have been for the last 100 years, to take on the issues that come from a Christian worldview, you have to show them that there is a block of votes that are there to be won by taking that agenda. And that is where the CPA comes in. We're never going to win power, let's be honest. However, if enough Christians get involved with the CPA and vote for the CPA, at some point the two major parties will go, there's votes over there to be won. and then they will start to take up the concerns of the Christian community in the same way that the Green Party forced the Green agenda into the centre of politics, UKIP forced the EU into the centre of politics, and sadly the BNP forced the immigration into the centre of politics. If you want these two parties to look and take on the Christian worldview or aspects of the Christian worldview into their agenda, you have to show them that there are votes to be won. And the CPA is the means by which you can do that. Vote for the CPA, and then eventually these two parties will steal our manifesto and put it in theirs.
Well, Lindsay, I think this has been a terrific evening because we've been grappling together with some really big and important and difficult questions. Bill, you're right, there isn't an unlimited pot of money, but elections are the time when we make a choice, and I'm arguing we should make different choices. It was Nye Bevan who said that socialism is the language of priorities. We have, at the moment, and are heading for one of the lowest corporation tax rates in Europe. And we think we should ask big businesses to pay a bit more to fund the things that we've talked about this evening, health and education. Bill, on refugees, I'm really proud that I live in a country that has given shelter to people fleeing persecution, many hundreds of whom I have lost, including people who have fled religious persecution in other parts of the world. And I do not want that to change at all. On Brexit, my reservation about Theresa May's approach is very simply this. She says she's prepared to walk away with no deal. Now, no deal means a return to tariffs, non-tariff barriers, an end to a lot of the cooperative arrangements we've had with the EU. I voted Remain, I campaigned for Remain, but we lost. And I voted for the Article 50 legislation to start the process because I'm a Democrat and I respect the outcome of the referendum. But we need a deal. And on Europe, I have to say to the Prime Minister, wrong leadership is not strong leadership. And the final thing I want to say is, it's kind of you to say, Carl, it's not a coronation, it's a democracy. And you decide the outcome. 45% of your friends and neighbours in this constituency didn't vote 2 years ago. And the one thing I plead is, I hope you'll vote for me, but more than anything else, I hope we'll go out there and vote on the 8th of June, because that's how we keep our democracy alive. Thank you.
I'd like to thank our candidates for being here with us this evening and for standing, because our democracy will only be a democracy if people are willing to put themselves forward for election. So thank you for being prepared to stand for this election. I'd like to thank Ian for doing the timing here at the front. Thank you very much for that, Ian. I'd like to thank Paul for opening the bar. And the bar will be open for at least half an hour if you wish to have a drink, and if our candidates are able to stay, you'd be very welcome as well. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming, because without you being here, we wouldn't have had the questions that you've been able to raise this evening. Thank you all for coming. The election is on the 8th of June. I'm assuming that you will all be voting, and I hope that you will encourage all your neighbours to do so as well. For those who are voting here or elsewhere, last Tuesday evening we opened the church for prayer for those who wanted to come in, and it was open for people who weren't religious but who wanted just somewhere to sit with other people to reflect on the issues. I hope to be able to open the church during election day, at least after Slimming World have finished at 1 o'clock. And just as a space where you can use to think, pray, if that is something that you do, of any religion, but to think, and you'll be very welcome to come in. So thank you all for being here this evening. Do continue speaking and drinking, certainly continue thinking, and please vote. Thank you.